Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today is already day 4 of spoiler season for Aether Drift. It seems like we're flying right through it. That being said, they're kind of holding back, not releasing quite as many spoilers each day to try and milk it, make it last 2 weeks this time. So we do have a number of really crazy spoilers to go over, and I can't wait to dig right in. Before we do, make sure you like the video. It does help me get it out to so many more people, which helps the channel grow, so I would appreciate it so much. Also, subscribe if you're new so you never miss an upload. More spoiler content is on the way. Some crazy deck techs are on the way. Lots of crazy stuff on the way. Crazy on the way. Catch me live Monday through Friday over on Twitch. It's twitch.tv/QuarantineCapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. But that's not why you're here right now. You're here for spoilers, so let's do it. First up, we have 𝑊ickerfolk Indomitable, a 4/3 artifact creature scarecrow for 1 black and 3. You may cast this card from your graveyard by paying 2 life and sacrificing an artifact or creature in addition to paying its other costs. This seems absolutely insane, especially in a deck where you're going wide with maybe like artifact tokens, like clue tokens, map tokens, that sort of thing, and it's really easy to just keep replaying this from the graveyard over and over again by stacking really negligible tokens. It's really good at dealing with Get Lost. If they get lost your 𝑊ickerfolk Indomitable, they give you the map tokens, and you can just use those map tokens to replay the Indomitable. The one problem with this card is you do have to pay 2 life every single time you play it from the graveyard. That being said, there's potential to just dump this in your graveyard with Surveil and Self-Mill and stuff like that, and just play it out of your graveyard the first time you play it, which gives you just sheer card advantage, which is kind of cool. So there's a lot of different directions this card can go. I don't know if it's going to quite be good enough for Standard, but in Limited it's going to be super fun. Next up, we've got Mu Yanling Wind Rider. This is a 2/4 legendary human wizard pilot for 2 blue and 2. And the frame, the alternate art frame, is pretty interesting on this one. When this creature enters, you create a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1. Vehicles you control have flying, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Now, at first glance, this kind of looks like an Enduring Curiosity that has the upside of giving you extra board presence when it enters play, and giving you some evasiveness for your creatures if they're in the form of vehicles, without having the upside of coming back if it dies. But it's actually a little bit worse than that. I mean, it doesn't have flash, but the big thing here is the way it's worded. Whenever 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to a player, with flying specifically, you get to draw a card. So you can only draw a maximum of 1 card per combat step, unless you have like double strike or something like that, and then you could draw 2. So it's not quite as good as Enduring Curiosity when you take into account the fact that you can't draw multiple cards, you can't flash it in, it doesn't have built-in protection and all of that. But there is some pretty crazy upside to this card that's still pretty good. When it enters play, it gives you that 3/2 vehicle, which means it's good in like flicker decks. You can flicker it, keep creating vehicles, which is nice. Also, this could just be really good as like a win condition that you slam on the board. If the vehicles in this set end up being good enough, and it looks like they might, you could just go wide with a ton of vehicles, slam this thing in, and alpha strike in the air by giving them all flying just immediately, while also giving you some extra value. And if they do use removal on the Mu Yanling, like, sure, it doesn't come back like Enduring Curiosity, but it does leave behind the 3/2 vehicle token, which is kind of nice. So all in all, I don't think it's quite as good as Enduring Curiosity. Not many things are, but it is a pretty solid card, and it might see some play in some of the crazy vehicle decks that we're sure to see pop up after this set releases. Next up, we've got Canyon Vaulter. This is a 3/1 core pilot for 1 white and 1. Whenever this creature saddles or mounts or cruise, saddles a mount or cruise a vehicle during your main phase, that mount or vehicle gains flying until end of turn. So this thing just dishes out flying to the things that it cruise or saddles, which seems kind of nice. It reminds me of those Bronco decks that were making the rounds for a little while that used Steel Seraph because they could saddle the Bronco and give the Bronco flying so that the Bronco didn't die in combat. And this is like another card that you can use in the same way. If mounts and or vehicles end up being good enough, especially ground versions of them, This could end up being a very solid card in those kinds of decks to just give out evasion to whatever they want. Pretty interesting card. It's going to be super fun and limited because it's just a decent body for 2 anyway. 3 power, it kind of trades up or at least adjacently decently well while also turning on those mechanics, so pretty cool card. But next up we've got Carrion Cruiser. This is a 3/2 artifact vehicle for 1 black and 2. It crews for only 1, and when it enters you mill 2 cards and then return a creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to your hand. Pretty interesting here. You have a permanent that helps you mill cards and get stuff back out of the graveyard. So you could utilize like flicker effects, stuff like that to get multiple uses off of this. Or just, you know, having this type of effect on something that counts as a permanent. If it goes to the graveyard, you descend. If you need an artifact in your graveyard for delirium and stuff like that, this can count as that while also being a thing that mills. And a lot of times the cards that mill like this end up being like instants or sorceries. So there's a lot of little negligible silver lining values, you know, built into this card. But at the end of the day, I think it's mostly just meant to be in some kind of a self-mill limited deck, if that archetype exists within this limited format, and I'm pretty sure it does. Next up, we've got Interface Ace. This is a 0/4 robot pilot artifact creature for 1 white, and 1. Where did I get the blue? This creature saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles using its toughness rather than its power, which is pretty interesting. Whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, you untap it. This ability triggers only once each turn. I think this guy is deceptively good. He comes down on 2 and is a really good blocker against aggro, and then once you get down a really good vehicle you want to crew with him, he crews for a whopping 4 and untaps so that you can still use him as a blocker, which is awesome. So you're swinging in with your powerful vehicles and holding up a 0/4 blocker to keep beating back aggro. And that alone seems pretty good for a common, but I think it gets even better than that, because if you have a way to give this guy tap abilities, maybe with like Agatha's Soul Cauldron by eating something with a really amazing tap ability, you could use a tap ability, untap him, use him for a tap ability again, and not even worry about the whole mount and crew thing. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this, and the fact that it's just an artifact, right? It counts as an artifact for decks that care about going wide with artifacts too. So there's a lot of little silver lining value built into this, a lot of interesting ways you could use it, and I'm super excited to see what we could do with this in Standard. Even though at first glance it seems like it might only be a limited card, I'm absolutely going to brew with this. That being said, in Limited it's going to be amazing, especially in the vehicle decks, obviously, but if there are any ways to give tap abilities in Limited, it'll be cool for that too. Next up, we've got Roadside Blowout. This is 1 blue and 2 for a sorcery. It costs 2 less to cast if it targets a permanent with mana value 1. So hitting a 1-drop only costs you 1. You get to draw a card and return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its owner's hand. This is actually really nice. Like, a turn 1 bounce your, mono red aggro's 1-drop for 1 mana and draw a card cantrip seems bananas. Like an opt, kind of an opt, I mean, without the scry, but an opt that also bounces their 1-drop seems kind of awesome. And then the fact that it can be cast for 3 mana to hit whatever you need to, something bigger later on, and you still get to draw a card no matter what, actually seems kind of bananas. I think this is probably one of the better common, uncommon cards we've seen for blue in this set so far. And I absolutely think this is going to see play in Standard. I'm super excited to see just how crazy it ends up being, because there's just a lot of potential. The fact that it draws you a card no matter what is nuts, and the fact that aggro is so huge right now and 1-drops are so important really makes this card be in complete contention for actually seeing play in that format. Next up, we've got Curse Cloth Wrappings. This is an artifact for 2 black and 2. All zombies you control get +1/+1, but honestly that's just gravy. The real point of the card is you can tap it, target creature card in your graveyard gains Embalm until end of turn. The Embalm cost is equal to its mana cost. So basically once a turn, you're allowed to replay any creature from your graveyard for its normal casting cost, but it enters as a token copy, right? You exile the original card, and a token copy of it will enter. So this can actually give you a lot of additional value in ways that might not be obvious at first, such as playing it in some kind of a token deck with Caretaker's Talent, things like that. You're drawing cards every time you replay a creature from the graveyard. That seems kind of cool. I feel like there's a lot of interesting ways that you can use this, specifically because the things that are entering are going to be zombies and are going to be tokens. And I feel like there's multiple ways to take advantage of both of those things, so if you have ideas, definitely let me know in the comments. But the way that I'm most excited about using this card is definitely with 𝐻𝑸𝑚𝑚, because 𝐻𝑸𝑚𝑚's already making zombie tokens of your legendaries when they die, and then this can recast those same legendaries from the graveyard as zombie tokens that will then still trigger the legend rule and trigger 𝐻𝑸𝑚𝑚 all over again. It just seems like it can go absolutely bananas, and it's sort of built-in protection for your 𝐻𝑸𝑚𝑚, because if your opponent kills your 𝐻𝑸𝑚𝑚 before you get your shenanigans online, you can use Curse Cloth Wrappings to just replay the 𝐻𝑸𝑚𝑚 itself, which is pretty awesome. So, I don't know, the more I think about this card with 𝐻𝑸𝑚𝑚, the more I think there might be something there. Like, this might be a thing, and I'm excited to at least find out and brew that deck and just see how deep it can go. Pretty exciting card, I think. I think the least exciting way to use it is in some kind of a zombie tribal deck, and at first glance it kind of seems like that's probably what it should be used in, but it might be awesome there too. Tell me what you think in the comments, but we're going to move on. Next up, we've got Glory Heath Lynx. This is a 2/3 cat mount with lifelink for 1 white and 1. It saddles for 2, and whenever this creature attacks while saddled, you search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. I like this a lot. No matter what, it's a 2/3 lifelinker for 2 mana. That's already pretty decent, and it counts as a cat, and cat tribal decks are like relevant right now. So even if you don't saddle it, it's still just a 2/3 lifelink that hits the board and helps hold back aggro. And then if you do get to saddle it, you just get to search up plains every time it attacks, put them into your hand, also gain some life on the swing to help win the race. There's just a lot this can do, but I think at the core of what makes this good is just the fact that it's a 2/3 lifelinker for 2, and you don't need to saddle to make it good. But if you can saddle, you get a ton of card advantage over time. You get to make sure you hit your land drops. You get to ramp into the stuff you need to. Just either way you play this card ends up being good. So I think it's the floor of this card being so high that makes it awesome, while the ceiling is just like, find every plains in your deck over the course of, you know, a long game at least. Very interesting card. Gonna be amazing in Limited for sure. Next up, we have Beast Rider Vanguard. This is a 2/2 human knight for 1 green and 1. And for 1 green and 4, you can look at the top 3 cards of your library, reveal a permanent card from among them, and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Now, at first glance, this looks like it's way too expensive, but we've seen a bunch of cards in this set that let you generate extra mana that you can only use for activated abilities. So if we continue to see enough of those cards like that, honestly, this could end up being relatively easy to achieve. Either way, having a 2-mana 2/2 that later in the game can give you just free value as a mana sink when you run out of gas is going to be pretty good in Limited. Now, this guy won't see any play in Constructed Play or anything like that, but in Limited, he does have the potential to be something pretty impressive. Next up, we have End Rider Catalyzer. This is a 3/1 human warrior for 1 red and 1. He has Start Your Engines, putting you at speed 1, and during each of your turns that your opponent loses life, you're allowed to increase that speed by a maximum of 1 for that turn. When you reach max speed, being 4, it turns on the ability to tap him to add 2 red mana. I actually think this is kind of insane, and this guy might actually even see play in Standard because it's just that crazy. If he wasn't a 3-power creature for 2 that was at least relevant on curve, you know, as a threat that could trade decently well with your opponent's board state, I don't know if I'd feel that way, but having an aggressive thing that's just going to all of a sudden turn on the ability to generate 2 extra mana when you hit max speed, which should be pretty easy to do in an aggressive deck, actually kind of seems pretty nuts. So I'm excited to brew with this guy and just see how crazy it can get. It really depends on how good the Start Your Engines decks end up being, and the key to that, I think, really relies on how many 1-drops that are relevant, that are actually worth playing that also incidentally happen to start your engines, or fingers crossed maybe if there's lands that start your engines, because I think if you can start your engines as early as turn 1 and hit your max speed on curve from there, it could be really, really bananas, especially with an ability like this to just make red mana. I have a feeling there's going to be some deck out there that makes crazy use of this. At the very least, you could use this with something like Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and when you hit max speed, all of your dudes now tap for 2 mana, and that seems cool. In limited, this guy's going to be nuts. You know, it's going to be pretty easy to, even if you're not in an aggro deck, to eventually hit max speed at some point during the game and just get free mana out of this guy. And again, it all comes back to the fact that he's still an okay body on curve, so it's not like you're sacrificing tempo or board potential in order to have this potential to hit max speed. It's just kind of extra in a way, and I kind of love that about this card, and I think that's what makes it gives it the most potential to be competitively viable. But next up, we've got Brightfield Glider. This is 1 white mana for a 1/1 Possum mount with Vigilance. It saddles for a whopping 3, and that's because whenever this creature attacks while saddled, it gets +1/+2 and flying until end of turn. So you could drop a 2-drop with 3 power like that guy that we just saw as the last card, and just immediately swing in with a 2/3 flying Vigilance creature on turn 2, which is actually pretty good. You see that saddle 3 at first, and that makes the card look like it's nowhere near as good as it actually is, because it doesn't seem super reasonable for a 1-drop. But the more you start to think about the different play lines you can have, and the more abundant you realize 3-power 2-drops are these days, the more obvious it becomes that this is actually a pretty decent card on curve in an aggressive deck. Especially if you're some kind of a crazy like mount tribal deck that has more synergies and benefits off of mounts, this could get pretty nuts. So I kind of like this card. It's definitely going to be really great in limited, because it just constantly gives you a way to swing through for damage in the air super early. Next up, we've got District Mascot. This is 1 green mana for a 0/0 dog mount that enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. It saddles for just 1, and whenever it attacks while saddled, you get to put another +1/+1 counter on it. And then at any point in time, you can pay 1 green and 1, remove 2 +1/+1 counters from it to destroy any target artifact. This is another one of those cards that I think people are going to see, and they're going to think it's alright at first, because you have this incidental way of destroying artifacts built in. But I think as people start to play with this card more when the set's released, they're going to realize just how good it is. The fact that it's just a 1-drop and can just grow every single turn into a realistic, sizable threat is not nothing. And the fact that you have this incidental, recursive way of destroying artifacts over and over and over built into the card is also great. And the fact that it doesn't have to rely on saddling it to get its +1/+1 counters. You could play it in a deck that is supplying counters by another means with another card, and just really go ham with this guy getting big and then just destroying multiple artifacts without having to use up cards to do it. Just remove a couple counters, destroy their key artifacts. I think with how ridiculous artifact decks are going to be after this set comes out, at least it seems like that's going to be the case. It seems like this set's going to do for artifacts what Duskmourn did for enchantments. And if that's the case, this guy's going to be incredibly important, and you're going to probably see him in a lot of green decks. Pretty gnarly, man, but if you have an idea about how you'd use him, definitely let me know in the comments. Next up, we've got Nesting Bot. Speaking of crazy, this is a 1/1 artifact creature robot for 1 white mana. It has start your engines, so we were just talking about having enough good 1-drops that start your engines to make sure you can start your engines on turn 1, and how important that's going to be to decks that utilize that mechanic. This does that, but it's so much more than that. When this creature dies, you create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, and if you hit max speed, this creature gets +1/+0. I absolutely love this card. No matter what, you start your engines, right? There's no undoing that. There's no taking that back. You slam this on turn 1, you start your engines. There's nothing your opponent can do about that. From that point on, it's go. The race is on, right? And then even if this guy dies, you get another 1/1 to replace him, and your engines are still started, right? You're still getting to tick up that speed every single turn as long as you can do damage. I think this is one of the better one-drop creatures that replaces itself with a 1/1 when it dies that we've seen maybe ever. The fact that it can become a 2/1 built in is honestly just kind of crazy gravy. The fact that it counts as an artifact for things that synergize with artifacts, there's so many little bits of incidental upside that this card has, but the most important part of it is simply that it starts your engines on turn 1, and that's going to be huge, I think. So I think this card is nuts. I think it's gonna be nuts once people realize what it can do and how effective max speed can be in the right deck. At least that's how it seems. We haven't seen the whole set yet, so it's hard to know for sure. But if I was a betting man, that's what I would bet on right now. I think this card is awesome. Next up, we've got Stock Up. This is 1 blue and 2 for a sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Man, this is just a strict upgrade to Divination, right? This is just better than Divination, just straight up. We've come a long way since Divination for sure. Instead of just drawing 2 for 3 mana at sorcery speed, now you get to draw the best 2 of the top 5. That's just awesome. This card's really good. I don't think it's quite there for Constructed. I think the card quality in Standard right now is insane because of 3-year rotation. But in Limited, this is going to be a slam dunk. Like, everyone's probably first picking this in Limited. Not only are you getting to draw cards, but you're getting card selection from the top 5. And in Limited, where you only have 40 card decks, that top 5 is way more relevant. It's not like you're seeing the top 5 of a 60 card deck. So you're much more likely to hit your bomb or whatever you need. And in Limited, bombs rule the day. So I just think this card is amazing. It's like the next best thing to a tutor while still giving you card advantage. It's everything you want in Limited. This is going to be a very high pick for sure. Slam dunk, 100%. But next up, we've got Tune Up. This is a sorcery for 1 white and 3. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it's a vehicle, it becomes an artifact creature. What's cool about this card is it becomes an artifact creature forever. It's not just like an end of turn thing. It's not like it just crews it for that one turn. It just straight up turns your best vehicle in your graveyard into an artifact creature that doesn't need to be crewed for the rest of the game for only 4 mana. I think this might be the new Greasefang for Standard. I mean, I've got my fingers crossed we get an actual Greasefang and that it has something to do with vehicles in your graveyard, just like the old Greasefang. And I'm not giving up hope on that yet. But if there is a graveyard vehicle sort of deck, this card will absolutely be in there. Turn 4, get your best vehicle into play. We already saw Valor's Flagship, right? That crazy, huge white vehicle that can put itself into the graveyard by cycling. This can absolutely be used with that at the very least, and you can only go up from there. So I think this card is really cool. It really does depend on how good the vehicles are and how good the vehicle deck ends up being, as far as how good this actually ends up being at the end of the day. And we have a whole another half, more than half of the set to still be spoiled, so not 100% sure just how good it is yet. But it's definitely meant to be used in some kind of a Standard deck with Valor's Flagship and with some other crazy vehicles. It's just a matter of how good that deck actually ends up being at the end of the day. Fingers crossed. I'm still hoping for Greasefang. But next up, we've got Veloheart Bike. This is a 4/2 artifact vehicle for 1 green and 2. When it enters, you gain 2 life, which is nice. It crews for just 2, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. So kind of maybe the best common mana rock we've gotten in a long time. It's a mana rock that costs 3, but you can add a mana of any color, and you just gain 2 life when you play it, so kind of helps win the race against aggro, and it can be a relevant threat as a 4/2 creature if you crew it for 2. So a lot of extra value tacked on top of your, mana of any color mana rock. The one real downside this has compared to some of the other 3-drop mana rocks is just the fact that you need green mana to play it, but you're probably playing green as one of your base colors if you're playing a multicolor deck anyway. So I don't know how much that will actually matter, at least not in Limited. I think this card is really awesome. I'm excited to see just how good it can be. I don't think it's quite there for constructed, but I've seen crazier things. If you need a mana rock for your vehicle deck, if there's some kind of crazy cross-pollinated synergies for like ramping up to a big play, but also wanting vehicles because you have things that synergize with vehicles, this could be a slam dunk in a standard deck like that even. But it really depends on what the rest of the cards look like, so we'll have to wait and see. But next up, we've got Explosive Getaway. This is a sorcery for 5 mana in the colors of Boros. It deals 4 damage to each creature, so it's kind of a sweeper. It's a sweeper that your big creatures can dodge, but it's a little bit better than that because you exile up to 1 target artifact or creature and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So basically, you can exile your best creature so that it dodges, or best artifact, so that it dodges your sweep, dodges your 4 damage, right? And then it comes back at the end of turn after you've wiped the board, and you still have it. You can still start winning the game and have a lead in the tempo game and start to win the game with your cards. So kind of crazy. I think it is a bit expensive at 5. I think if this was 4, it would probably be too good though. So 5 makes sense. You can also use it in some other interesting ways. I think this is the perfect sweeper for like a blink or flicker deck, because you get to do the things that the deck wants to do anyway, while also having access to sweeping in case, you know, your opponent's board state gets out of hand and you're not going to have time to do all of your flicker shenanigans like you want. Sweep the board while also flickering something in the same card seems kind of nice. Also, you know, get that repeated value off of your artifacts or creatures entering the battlefield and triggering enters the battlefield abilities and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of different ways this can be used. Yeah, it's an interesting card. It's hard to picture how good it will actually be until we try it, but there has to be a deck out there somewhere that wants something like this, right? I feel like there has to be, with like Prototype and all sorts of other crazy potential flicker payoffs. We're gonna explore for sure. We're gonna brew something. I think this card could end up being really good in just the right deck. But next up, we've got Bestow Greatness. This is just 1 green and 2 for an instant. Target creature gets +4/+4 and trample until end of turn. This is nothing to write home about. In fact, it's pretty expensive for what it does. That being said, it is an instant combat trick that'll blow out your opponent if you're able to hold up the 3 mana. Also doubles as a nice way to alpha strike in and close out a game early by giving a whopping +4 power and trample to whatever you want. So it could be interesting. It could end up being versatile. We'll have to wait and see, but nothing too special with this one. Next up, we've got Pace Setter Paragon, a 2/3 human pilot for 1 red and 2, and it has an exhaust ability for 1 red and 2. Put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and give it double strike until end of turn. Now, it is kind of a bummer that it only gets double strike 1 time ever because it's an exhaust ability, so you can only use the exhaust ability 1 time ever in the whole game. But the +1/+1 counter does stick. It does become a 3/4 creature for the rest of the game. And I think if you're careful about how you use the ability, that double strike can really matter. I think what's cool about this guy, what's probably best about this guy, is just the threat of activation, being able to swing in with 3 mana held up, and your opponent knowing that you could at any point in time trigger this and have a 3/4 double striker. And so they kind of have to block very carefully around that and be careful not to get blown out by you activating the ability. So you can force them to block, you know, poorly, get extra value out of it that way, and then not even use the exhaust ability, just play out the rest of your hand like you normally would afterwards. So I think if you can effectively leverage the bluff, the threat of activation on using the exhaust ability to get extra value out of this card, I think it can really shine. It should be pretty good and limited for sure. But next up, we've got Back on Track. This is 1 black and 4 for a sorcery. You return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this token saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. This isn't as good as the 4 mana vehicle reanimator card that we saw not too long ago because it's a whopping whole extra mana. But it is only an uncommon, and it does give you 2 cards for 1 basically. It gives you your best creature or vehicle and a 1/1 pilot that can probably pilot whatever vehicle you brought back. And the extra versatility of being able to hit an actual creature with this and not having to hit a vehicle is pretty nice. I think this is going to be particularly good in limited. Just getting an extra 1/1 body that can do stuff alongside your best creature or vehicle back from the graveyard is nothing to scoff at. Getting automatic card advantage built into your reanimation spell is really nice. So I don't know, is this going to see play in Constructed? Probably not. At this point, 5 mana is just too much for your reanimation spells. There's just too many ways to bring things back for cheaper. But in limited, I do think this is pretty cool. Next up, we've got Demonic Junker. This is 1 black and 6 for a 4/3 artifact vehicle. It has affinity for artifacts. That's right, affinity for artifacts is back in standard, and I am terrified with how crazy this set is looking in as far as artifacts in general. Demonic Junker here can cost as low as just 1 black mana for a 4/3 artifact vehicle that crews for 2. But the best part is when it enters, for each player you destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. If a creature you controlled was destroyed this way, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on this vehicle. So you could theoretically at the ceiling, for 1 mana, kill any creature or vehicle and get a 6/5 vehicle that crews 2 for yourself. You could also choose to kill your own thing if you have something in play that gives you value when it dies, something that's sacrifice fodder or whatever. You could also kill your own thing for free. That's not always going to be something you want to do, but there is some negligible upside there for certain decks. It really makes me wonder if this might be removal of choice for certain go-wide artifact sacrifice decks, which could be really interesting. I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see, but just the potential for this to be a 1 mana kill anything with, automatic card value just kind of added to it seems kind of awesome. It's also worth noting that it's a removal spell that counts as an artifact itself. So you can kill something for as low as 1 mana and then have another artifact on the battlefield to add to your artifact synergies, to your go-wide synergies for artifacts or whatever, or have another artifact to sacrifice to some of your sacrifice stuff. The more I think about it, the more I really think there might be a prime artifact sacrifice deck just ready, rip rare and ready to go, that this card could slot into, and I hope I'm right, because that could be pretty amazing. But next up, we've got Gilded Goda. This is a 2/2 horse mount that saddles for 1 for just 1 red and 1. And whenever this creature attacks while saddled, you create a treasure token. What's great about this is that it's a common, so this is an easy way for red to color fix in limited, and be able to maybe splash a 3rd color in your deck by using this and a couple other fixers. I really like having access to color fixing in common in each of the colors or in any color beyond green. It feels really nice, but it also generates ramp value over time, right? Every single time it swings saddle, it's going to give you another treasure. You can, save those up and then play some crazy, ridiculous late game play as early as the mid game and not have to wait until the late game and just win the game super quick. So, and then there's the fact that there's, a lot of mount synergies within this set as well. So there's other ways to potentially give this card some value just for being a mount. So a lot of potential with this card. I like it a lot. I don't think it's quite there for Constructed, but crazier things have happened, so maybe. Next up, we've got Haunt the Network. This is a sorcery for 5 mana in the colors of Dimir. You choose target opponent, create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying, and then the chosen player loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Is it just me or does this seem bananas? With how crazy artifact decks seem like they're gonna be in this set, this card just seems nuts. Now granted it's 5 mana and 5 is a lot, but I think of it kind of in the same realm as Corrupt. And Corrupt was 6 mana. Corrupt was more mana than this and was still great for just draining out your opponent and killing them outright in certain control decks back in the day, and could be used as removal if you were desperate and needed to. This you can't really use as removal, but it's only 5 mana, and it gives you board presence. It gives you 2 1/1 flyers, and it also makes sure it drains for an extra 2 because of those Thopters that it gives you. So I think in the right deck, where you're just going ham with a ton of artifacts on the battlefield at once, this could actually be a win condition and kind of crazy. I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see when the set drops. But I absolutely want to brew with it. I'm crazy. Maybe, I don't know. Most of you are probably going to see this card and think it's way too expensive for standard. But I, being the madman that I am, I really want to brew a go wide artifact deck in standard with this card as a finisher. And even if it doesn't finish the job, it does a ton of damage, you gain a ton of life, and it gives you board presence, so like you can get there quick enough. I don't know. I just love this card. Definitely there's going to be an archetype in Limited that wants you to go wide with artifacts in Dimir that will make great use of this card. And I'm excited to use it there as well. But next up, we've got Clamorous Ironclad. This is a 6/3 artifact vehicle for 1 red and 3. It crews for 3. It has Menace. And here's the important part. It cycles for just 1 red mana. We've already seen a bunch of ways in this set that you can get value off of discarding cards. So having a cycling card that only cycles for 1 mana is actually insane. All of the times that cycling mattered the most, where cycling ended up being super relevant in standard, it involved sets where we had cycling cards that cost 1 mana. So seeing our first cycling card, I think it's our first cycling card that costs only 1 mana to cycle, does put that thought in my head. Like, cycling could be a real legitimate thing again. I don't know if there's actual cycling payoffs in the set, but at the very least we have discard payoffs that can give us value for discarding things. And the more I think about it, the more I really think that this card's going to be absolutely nuts, and that sort of a deck is absolutely going to be a thing. At the very least, we did see that one drop red creature that puts counters on itself equal to however many cards you discarded every time you discard. So being able to cycle this for 1 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on that, when everything in your deck is probably cycling or discarding and putting tons of counters on that guy, just seems perfect. That will absolutely be a deck. The real question is, are we going to get actual cycling payoffs, or do we just have, you know, more vague sort of discard payoffs like we've seen so far? I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see until we, you know, see the rest of the whole set spoiled out. But definitely, that deck has a ton of potential, and this card's going to be pretty wild in Limited for sure, just because it could be a pretty relevant threat on the board, or it can just redraw a card for you for just 1 mana, which is nuts. But next up, we have our last card of the day. This is Perilous Snare, an artifact for 1 white and 2. It has Start Your Engine, so if you haven't already, it'll put you at speed 1. At max speed, you get to tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or vehicle you control, and activate that ability only as a sorcery. But all of that is just gravy, because the real use of the card is when this artifact enters, you exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this artifact leaves the battlefield. So this is an artifact version of an Oblivion Ring, except it has all these extra pieces of value built in. It can start your engines, it can put counters on things when you reach max speed, it can just be an artifact for things that care about you going wide with artifacts and count towards your artifact count. It can also get cost reductions from the things that reduce the cost of artifacts. You can use like a fabrication foundry to play this, so you could, you know, basically play it like it's a 2-drop by using mana from that. So there's just a lot of little negligible ways in which I feel like this is strictly better than a lot of the other 3-mana exile spells that we've seen in the past. And I kind of love it, honestly. The more I think about it, it's harder to get rid of because enchantments have been so crazy lately that there's more enchantment removal running around than artifact removal. So because of that, it's a little bit harder to get rid of since it's an artifact version of a card like that and not an enchantment. Whichever way you slice it, this card is just awesome. And I can't wait to brew with it. I can't wait to play it in decks that care about artifacts, that maybe care about +1/+1 counters to make that extra negligible max speed ability matter that much more. There's just so much potential for a card like this, and I can't wait. But that's going to do it for today. That's the last card. There will be more spoilers coming, so look forward to the next video. And if you wouldn't mind, please hit that like button so that I can get this video out to so many more people, because every single like truly does make a huge impact. I appreciate it greatly. Also subscribe so you never miss an upload. This little miss would appreciate it greatly. What are you doing? Why you always gotta jump up on my lap when I'm trying to record? I heard you making noise earlier. Were you knocking stuff over? You're a goober. Well, either way, she thanks you for checking out the video and clicking the like button and subscribing and all that stuff. And maybe if you catch me live over on Twitch Monday through Friday, you might catch a glimpse of her in the background too. That's twitch.tv/quarantinecapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming, unless she's being obnoxious and I gotta go fix it. But I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.